Item 10B, we have three items. Waive the second reading and adopt an ordinance approving the amendment to the development plan to allow two alternative design options. Adopt a resolution approving a 12-month extension of Planned Development Permit 0502, which currently allows for the demolition of the existing 308-unit apartment complex and the development of 510 new residential units. And adopt a resolution approving Planned Development Permit 1001, an architectural review permit to allow for the renovation of the existing 308 apartment units per Chapter 12 of the San Bruno Municipal Code as an alternative project design option under the development plan. Staff report, please.
Thank you and good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. As the Council remembers, this item has been before you several times in different iterations. In 2006, the developer received approval to build a 510-unit building. In 2008, they received approval by the City Council for a new architectural design related to that 510-unit building. And 2 weeks ago, they were here before you with two different actions. The first was requesting an ordinance amendment to allow two different development options on this site. One development option would be the 510-unit building that was previously approved. And the second option was the renovation design alternative. And this is basically a renovation of the existing 308 units that are on site, modernization of the complex that is there now. The City Council at that meeting took action and adopted the ordinance for the planned development, had the first reading of the ordinance. However, the City Council deferred action on the resolutions that would approve the planned development permit for both the 510-unit project as well as the 308-unit project, and gave several direction related to these resolutions. The primary direction related to the 308-unit renovation project. So I'll just go over briefly what those are. The first and biggest change was to modify the conditions of approval to allow the applicant to dedicate Susan Drive and Highland Drive as public roadways. As the council remembers, this is a roadway that the public travels through their development, and council gave direction to include the allowance of making these public roadways. With that in mind, staff has worked with the developers over the last 2 weeks in an improvement agreement, and the newest version of that improvement agreement has been passed out to the council tonight. And what that does, it shows what the terms will be if for the city to accept ownership of the roadway, as well as the applicant's continuing obligation for the roadway during the construction period. The other conditions that were modified is there was the condition related, you may remember that there was quite a bit of discussion around the trash compactor. There was a modification to that condition of approval that it must comply with the city's noise ordinance. We removed the condition of approval for the $179,000 sewer line relocation work. This is just for the renovation project, though. The condition remains in the report if the developer decides to proceed with the new 510-unit building. We added a condition that requires the applicant maintain utilities as private utilities. Modified a condition of approval related to the exact number of trees that would have to be planted as a street tree planting program. And what staff will do is take a look at the final landscaping plan, and all trees that serve as street trees will be credited to the developer's overall obligation, and the remaining amount will be part of a neighborhood street tree planting program. One important condition and related to safety is we added a condition that the applicant must trim or remove vegetation for site visibility reasons on Sharp Park and Susan Drive and maintain that visibility throughout the life of the project. And another change was we modified the maintenance plan. All the routine obligations, picking up trash, removing graffiti, have to start immediately. They have to enter into this maintenance plan by June 30th, and the more structural obligations kick in on November 1st if the developer has not proceeded with construction. That includes securing the balconies, power washing the mold off the buildings, and removing and boarding up some of the windows. So those were the major modifications. In terms of triggers, As you know, the development plan allows two different options. Either option would go away once the developer pulls a building permit for one of them. So right now it looks like they're going the course for the 308-unit renovation project. In fact, they've already submitted building permit plans for this, and we're about to be in our second round of review for this. So they are well underway doing that. For either project, they have to start construction within a year time period. So there is a time period which they have to do this by. And their current development schedule has them breaking ground construction most likely in the middle of fall, so late October, early November. There is one remaining disagreement that has to do with stormwater. As noted, staff has conditioned the report per City Council direction that the stormwater system must remain private. A couple important things to note that went into making this recommendation. This is a similar situation to what we have all around San Bruno. We are a hillside community, and often stormwater collects on one private property, goes across another private property on the way to the public storm drain system. A simple example of this, you have a neighbor that sits upslope from you, their stormwater may travel off, as gravity dictates, their stormwater may travel off of their property onto your property onto the stormwater system. So that is the primary reason why we condition it as such. Another important thing to note is that it would create a Shelter Creek-like situation as a part of the stormwater pipe goes between buildings on the Treetops property. So I'm sure the applicant will also state their side of the story, but with that, we'd like to recommend approval of the resolutions in the report with the modifications and direction by council.
Any questions of staff? All right, see the applicant, would you like to speak on this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, and I'd like to thank staff for organizing over this last 2 weeks all the conditions and working with us. I think we've come to an agreement with everything except for this particular item relating to storm drain, so thank you. What I've provided you is a graphic, and I've shown this to staff as well, and it is summarizing or at least showing you what is existing out there today as far as the storm drains. I've been in discussions over the past 2 weeks with Public Works, and I've also attempted to explain at 2 weeks ago in the last City Council meeting what we had thought was the presentation and the agreement with council, and that was that the property owner, Aimco, would take on the sewer improvements, we would take on the water improvements, and in exchange the city was going to take on the streets and ownership and maintain them along with storm drains. As I explained in the last meeting, these storm drains, when council asked me if I agreed with staff on the utilities, all of which just serving our property, I agreed that the sewer does in fact just serve our property. I disagreed lightly that the water lines also is part of a loop system, but does predominantly serve our property. Therefore, we would take on the ownership and maintenance of those lines. However, I did explain to council that the storm drain does in fact serve other properties, that being Evergreen, as well as ours, and as well as the street itself. We were under the impression that that was council's understanding as well, that they would take on the streets and storm drain. If you look at the graphic, it's clear that the storm drain line, a large part, we believe, it's the majority of Evergreen. I think staff discussed with me today that they've concluded maybe it's half of Evergreen, albeit Evergreen does drain into this storm drain system. Part of the street that is off our property, Susan Drive, also drains into this system, which is the city street that's off our property. And that's in the lower right-hand corner of the graphic. As it comes off our property, you'll see some catch basins. That portion of Susan Drive drains into those catch basins, and that is, again, part of the public watershed. When the streets themselves become city streets, those streets will drain into catch basins. And if council can recall, 2 weeks ago when I explained this, it just makes practical sense for the storm drain lines themselves, which have catch basins that are integral with the streets themselves, to be therefore maintained by the person that owns and maintains the streets themselves. Our property does drain into this storm drain system as well, and it does exit for about 200 feet between buildings, which I understand is different than other projects in town where you have a lot longer distance between buildings where a lot bigger issues can come up. That's my understanding of exactly what exists today and what I tried to explain to council 2 weeks ago. We would like the city to maintain the catch basins and storm drain lines that are within Susan Drive and that also exit out to the public system.
Does that include the storm drains that travel through your property?
The storm drain lines that are not highlighted on this graphic, they're on our property per se, not in the what are soon to be public streets. We would be maintaining those.
And there's,
Okay.
well, right, and there's three inlets? Is that what those three?
That is correct.
Yeah.
The 3 lines that stop right at the edge of the road, that's where our lines would come in.
Okay. There's nothing down on Elston?
There are 2 catch basins down at the bottom where Elston and Highland join, and if you recall, 2 weeks ago, staff did conclude, and I'll let staff answer this question, that they already own and maintain those. I don't want to speak for staff on that.
But does Treetops connect into it?
The Highland Drive, we don't connect into those 2 catch
Not down
basins,
the
no.
hill, okay.
It drains Highland Drive and part of Elston.
Aaron, you spoke a little earlier about, how storm drains work, goes through private property. What's has been the typical responsibility? I know we really got burned on Shelter Creek because we had a situation that caused an awful lot of damage that we ended up being responsible for. So is there a typical precedent over and over and over again about responsibilities for these storm drains?
It's my understanding, and Clark could speak to any of the technical aspects, it's my understanding that stormwater systems that pass through private developments are maintained by the owners of that private development. It's somewhat of a unique situation since there is the public roadway that goes through here, but it is a private system within the private development, so that would be consistent with past precedent.
Okay, so technically it's in the development, but it happens to be within a street that the city has within the development.
Correct, and it's also next to other utilities that are going to be privately maintained.
Okay. Question? What's your...
Through the chair, I want to just touch on the roads very quickly. I know that came up last time. I understand there's the conditions because your legal counsel last time made reference that I went back, wanted to hear the dialogue and about hoping to bring it up or doing the best we can. And I know there's clear conditions and standards that are being set by the city. And I just want an assurance that irrelevant whether it's below the engineering costs, above the engineering costs, that all these standards and obligations are met by the developer and these roads and conditions when we do get them, that they are brought up to that standard. And is that the understanding and agreement?
That is the understanding, and just recently we've agreed with staff to, if you recall, there was a figure of $159,000 of improvements we were going to do to the roads. That has now increased to the tune of anywhere from $40,000 to $50,000 more due to some requirements that staff would like us to do even more than what we had said or a third-party report had said. So yes, and that is in the improvement agreement as well.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Thank you.
Okay.
At this point, I'd like to hear from our director as to what the liabilities could be in the immediate future or long range. I mean, And what concerns me is that there's considerable amount, it appears to be a considerable amount of runoff from the Evergreen property, in addition to what comes down Susan Drive and travels from the south on Susan Drive, off-site.
Mayor, council members, good evening. Our main consideration making the recommendation not to take over this section of the storm system is more a long-term financial concern and liability concern, knowing our challenges managing in the overall city our stormwater system. Which the city funding is very limited, and our stormwater fund is not enough to manage the existing system citywide. That was the main criteria how staff really analyzed this situation and made the recommendation to you. Based on our information in many other situations all over the city, you will see this type of situation when the surface water from the joint properties are discharged through another system through their property, and still is in the obligation of those private owners to take responsibility for long-term maintenance of the system. What is unique in this situation is that the city really taking over the responsibility of the road itself. That's why this situation is a little bit unique or different than the other situation, but. The city made the decision to take over the road to really make this development to happen. And the city already taking over a long-term financial liability taking over the road. And this would just add to that financial long-term liability to the city if the city would take over the storm system also. Based on our very rough estimate, without to do any scientific calculation or anything, was our assumption that the volume discharged through the system from Evergreen would be around 20% of the total volume carried in the system. But this is how I said, more a guesstimate and rough assessment than anything else. If the city would if you want to consider to take over the storm system as part of the road, even in that case, I would not recommend to take over any portion of that system outside of the road. That section which basically of the system outside of the road, which goes between two buildings, knowing the experience what the city had previously on Shelter Creek and on many other the same situation, I certainly would not recommend.
I agree. I totally agree. And I agree. And I would also add to that who's to anticipate what the liability is taking a majority or at least half of the runoff from Evergreen, at the south end of the property. I mean, what if something happened there and it happened to be right on Susan Drive?
And I will just add also in many other situations, like on Madison and many other locations, you have valley gutters basically taking surface runoff from dozen and dozen property to somebody else's property, and they are still maintained by those property owners. And those situations are all over the city. And yes, I think this is a big issue for the city, but as consistency, I don't see any departure from the existing situation citywide.
And one last thing. How would you distinguish between maintaining the storm drain just in the road and not, and then cutting off, once it went off the road?
My recommendation would be not to take over any portion of the storm system, but only just in the case if you really want to consider that I just offered as a possible alternative, and how certainly this part of the system is a private system. It's not city-owned through Evergreen. That means that is not even under discussion right now. Then would be only just the portion of the system until the storm system leaves the road.
Okay, and clearly the entire, everything that is highlighted here is on private property now. And until it hits the north end of, which is between Susan Drive and Sharp Park Road, that outlet.
Correct, but will be, is no question about it that the storm system collects the runoff from the road itself also, which after taking over the road will become a public road. But that volume is very limited and very small. And from our point of view, that should not create a problem for us that would flood the road or really would create any flooding on the road itself. Considering the geography of that area.
Okay.
We'll say a few more words.
If I could, Mayor, members of council, hearing what staff is discussing and some of these questions, if it helps clarify or help a decision come to fruition, would be that 200-foot segment that actually is on our property that goes between the two buildings. Since it is somewhat of a unique condition that Clara was describing, that you do have catch basins on city streets receiving city water, so to speak, that runs off from those. If the city were to take on those, we could then agree to maintain that 200-foot segment that is on our property that would not be on the public streets. So I don't know if that helps.
Go ahead. Someone here from the city manager, please.
I would just make one additional comment. I think the two directors have been very thorough in their commentary and their presentations, and I would agree absolutely with Mr. Finnegan that the portion of the storm drain line that underlays private property that will continue to be in private ownership by AIMCO, should not be considered for the City Council's decision-making tonight in terms of becoming a public facility. I would also remind the City Council that what you have before you tonight is a completely discretionary approval that confers a significant entitlement to the property owner, and one which is historically unprecedented in this city at least, where there is in fact two different options being provided to the owner for their eventual consideration of development of the property. So you have a relatively large discretion in making this approval and in considering this issue as one of those items for your consideration as part of that approval.
All right, thank you.
Does the city attorney or the Director of Community Development have any other additional comments or suggestions, thoughts that they would like to offer?
Only this, and put bluntly.
You can do that, Magic. Go ahead.
It's my last night. I'm going to go for it.
Oh, jeez. Here we go. You've been holding back. Just go.
I agree completely with what the city manager said, and it really comes down to this. this is an entitlement that is unusual, unique, and different. It is completely within the City Council's discretion as to whether it wants to grant it or not. And while I do have to compliment Mr. Finnegan for being absolutely thorough, and forgive me if I use the word relentless, I'm pursuing every possible advantage for AIMCO. He's done an excellent job with that. I would indicate to or say to the City Council that given what's at stake, the City Council taking over the road, allowing a discretionary approval that actually puts in the developer's hands the option as to which project it should do, a power normally reserved for the City Council, that the developer should be in here offering to you every other single thing it could in order to ease your decision. Thank you.
Well, I thought you'd be saving those compliments for us, not the developer.
You're probably not surprised that I agree entirely. Mr. Finnegan, just so you know, I'm really hesitant about taking over this, a piece of this and a piece of that. So, like I said, we've been burned before, and this is a unique situation, and you have been very creative, and I think the city is, if I may say, bent over backwards in the last year or two to be creative in this whole situation here. Never before have we had parallel projects like this going forward. Work with you with the engineering to make sure, in fact, the 308 units would, in fact, work. Assume responsibility for the road and things that we were really hesitant about doing. So I can tell you right now that I'm very hesitant about assuming the stormwater on the whole project.
Okay. Well,
Mr.
I appreciate that.
Anybody else? Sean?
I want to thank the council and thank staff, and I appreciate everything that both council and staff has done for us in hearing us. We feel as if we came to an agreement 2 weeks ago and taking on certain things, and we do appreciate how much staff and council have bent over for us and allowing us to move forward. We do want to do this project. We're in plan check. We were hoping to not have any issues tonight. It just made sense. We thought this one was resolved, and with the city owning the streets, it just makes sense for the catch basins to go along with that. We don't see this as a large dollar item. Storm drains typically don't have a lot of maintenance to them, so.
And I appreciate your comments, and I think you, along with staff and the council, we're all wanting to see this project come to fruition. No ands, ifs, or buts. And where I spoke last time to say that the streets, I could see accepting those because they're of public interest, I don't see that when we come to the utilities, they serve the public interest as the roads do. And as the mayor had indicated, as far as Shelter Creek, and I've heard from a wise man that once said, you know, I wish we could do the parking all over and go back in time, or what we accepted as far as what the mayor was talking about on the sewer and other issues. Well, we can't. We can learn from those and go forward. And I think that's what I'm going to do here, is learn from the past and ensure the citizens of this community aren't faced with that type of situation again.
Ken, anything else?
I agree. I'm ready to go.
Aaron, the item B, the waive second reading, the adopt both resolutions includes the developer taking responsibility for the entire storm drain system?
Correct.
Okay. Any action by the council?
Can't go. The architect.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm sorry. What did,
We need to waive the second reading?
make a motion to waive the second reading,
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
and then make motion to adopt the ordinance approving an amendment to the development plan. Is that correct? And
Count-
okay.
Councilmember Ibarra.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Medina.
Aye.
Mayor Ruane.
Aye.
Okay. To
And
adopt
if
the
you'd
re-
like, I can give you the titles. Would that help you?
adopt the resolution approving the 12-month extension.
Councilmember Ibarra.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Medina.
Aye.
Mayor Ruane.
Aye.
And also to adopt the resolution approving Plan Development Permit 10-01 and with the architectural review permit at all.
Councilmember Ibarra.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Medina.
Aye.
Mayor Ruane.
Aye.